Also coming up by the prominent personalities and going to be very, very interesting. Resilient pathways, charting India's economic growth amid global challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the moderator for this session, that is Shri Salman Soz. Is an economist, author, and commentator. He is an adjunct professor at the Anwar Kargash Diplomatic Academy in Abu Dhabi and a senior consultant at the World Bank, where he spent 25 years working across the world. He has authored books which are recognized by the Financial Times. He holds degree in economics from St. Stephen's College and Northeastern University and MBA from Yale University. May I request you to please put your hands together for Shri Salman Anis. Let's give a big round of applause to the speaker joining us on stage, please. So thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure to have you here. Request you to kindly take your seat as a moderator. Now let me introduce you to the speaker, ladies and gentlemen. The speaker joining us on stage is an Indian economist and civil servant, known for his pivotal role in India's economic reforms. Served as Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission of India, holding Cabinet Minister rank. He has held key positions such as Commerce Secretary, Finance Secretary, and Special Secretary to Prime Minister. Has been a member of Economic Advisory Council and contributed to public service and economic policy for decades. In 2011, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian honor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about Indian economist, former Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission of India, Shri Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Let's give a big round of applause to Shri Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Sat Sri Akal. Swagat hai. Request you to kindly take your seats. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to our speaker and the moderator. Come on, everyone, put your hands together. Give a round of applause to them.
Thank you. It is a hard act to follow when Shekhar Gupta goes off stage for two economists to regale the world, but we will do what we can. So our guest, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, needs no real introduction. I can just say that in our field, he is equivalent to a rock star. And I welcome him, I welcome all of you. Our topic is obviously the economy, because that's what makes the world go round. And no one, I think, in contemporary India who has the historical knowledge and the breadth of knowledge than Dr. Ahluwalia to actually help us understand what is going on in the world. But before we start, I would like to ask Dr. Ahluwalia one simple question, and that is, how did Dr. Ahluwalia become Dr. Ahluwalia? How did he decide to go into the world of policy? A little bit about his personal journey so that all of us are introduced properly.
Well, many thanks to the organizers, you, for inviting me here. You know, when I got the invitation to come to this Invest Karnataka forum, I thought it would be a nice way of hearing what's going on in the real economy and kind of fill out my knowledge of economics. How did I get into policy? Quite honestly, as an economist, I always wanted to be in policy. I worked for many years in the World Bank, and that gave me a sort of experience of dealing with policy issues in other countries. But that's really not a substitute, that's not real policy. Because you just go there and you go to a country and they're very nice to you, because ultimately they essentially want money from World Bank, and they realize they have to talk to you so that you can write a report of some kind. And then they say that's very interesting, and then they do what they have to do. I mean, the real test of policy making is to realize that almost anybody can make a general policy because there's generally a lot of agreement on directions that you want to move. The difficulty is that when you plan that out in detail, then the policies include many aspects which generate a lot of resistance. So to actually get it implemented, you have to make a judgment. What is it that the system will tolerate? What is it that's politically feasible? If you have to give up a few things because you have limited political mileage, what is it that you should concentrate on most? These things can only be done from the inside. I mean, foreign observers can write essays, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's the internal debate, both amongst economists, probably amongst the political class, amongst the business class, the interaction between these, and the transparency of that interaction that can make it interesting to make policy. Otherwise, I mean, if you want to do that, you have to do it in your own country. Nobody wants foreigners to give views, whether they're working for the World Bank or not. Let me just, the ever-present telephones keep distracting you. Okay, yep.
I think the audience is soon going to start asking us about what's happening in the world today with President Trump coming in, tariffs, etc., how that impacts the economy, how it impacts businesses, and other things about the topic. But before we talk about the present and the future, let's talk a little bit about the past. In 1991, we had a major balance of payments crisis in India. That, in some ways, facilitated this path towards reforms at that time. Can you take us back to that moment? You were one of the key policymakers at that time, working with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was our finance minister at the time. What was going on? What did you see? What was the crisis about? And how did you actually come up with the solutions to take us out of there?
Wow, that's a tough question. I mean, if you ask an 81-year-old, that's my age now, but what they were doing like 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, and you want to do that in what Shekhar Gupta said, 200 words, or not 200 words, 200 characters, very difficult. I don't know how much people are interested. It's a very rich story, and if I may put in an advertisement at this point, the book I wrote, which is called Backstage, gives you an account. It's not an autobiography of just me, although since I was very much involved, I mean, I obviously tell the story from my point of view. It gives a very detailed account. So I'm going to just say in 2 sentences or 3, but those of you that are really interested, just read that book. Bottom line is that we, in 1991, ran into a first-class real crisis of the kind that we've never had since then. In many, we've had problems of tension points, etc., but we never had that. And that was a moment, and the politics was very confused. Governments had changed just before that. When Mr. Narasimha Rao chosen by the party to be the Prime Minister of a coalition government, I mean, he was advised that, look, we have enough foreign exchange to maintain the next 2 months or 2 weeks of imports. So it was very clear that you had a crisis. I think what you had to do was also very clear. That is, you had to get assistance from organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, because that gives you time to handle the problem. I think the important thing about the crisis was that the government just didn't focus on managing the crisis. They used that as an opportunity to get a whole lot of reforms done. And I think it was possible to do that because there had been a lot of discussion, and I won't go into all that, internally, that we need to change or we don't need to change. There were a lot of different views. I mean, the left was totally opposed to any of this liberalization. The right was kind of in favor of liberalization, but not foreigners coming in and investing. So, you know, it was an interesting feature. But I think the Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, was aware of the fact that we needed to change. And he chose Manmohan Singh to be the technical architect of the change. And I mentioned in my book that, you know, Dr. Manmohan Singh said to Mr. Narasimha Rao that, look, a lot of what we have to do will be politically difficult. And Mr. Narasimha Rao said, yes, I'm aware of that. You leave the politics to me. You do what needs to be done. And then he made a very important point. He said, if you succeed, we will share the credit. If you fail, you'll get the blame. And that politicians need some such cover. But the fact is that he backed him. Without his backing, this whole story would have been over very, very quickly. And I think it's worked very well. You could read my book to get my view on all of that.
Short answer, read his book. But now, we haven't had, fortunately, such a crisis since that time, although we've had crises of different nature, like the global financial crisis. But would you say that we've not had that level of reforms in our economy? And if so, why not?
Now, that's a very good question, because there's no question that in 1991, we were able to unleash both an outlined principle of reform, which actually clearly stated one or two things that were a marked departure from the past. And those things were, number one, the idea that the public sector must occupy the commanding heights of the economy and that the government must control the allocation of resources, especially foreign exchange, and the market would have no role in that. I mean, this was just wrong. And we moved away from that. And I think we did a reasonably good job in demolishing a lot of the stuff that earlier existed. Okay? I don't think we've had a comparable, there were other things. I mean, if you're going to be private sector led, you have to have a functioning financial system to allocate resources. So there's a whole bunch of financial sector reforms. If you're private sector led and you're pro-foreign investment, which we said you should be, then you've got to have appropriate ways of foreign money coming in. So the Reserve Bank of India's approach to this kind of thing has to be suitably supported. It was also very clear that we needed an inclusive growth process. I mean, there's no way that the country would have tolerated or should tolerate a growth process that didn't reduce the level of poverty, that's one thing, but also a growth process where the benefits of growth are more widely spread. That can be a little complicated because, you know, you can have benefits of growth widely spread by income class, but not widely spread by region. So you can have growing regional inequality, even though the distribution of income just across individuals doesn't change very much. It really means that for any given distribution, more and more of the poor become Bihar and East UP and so on, and more of the rich and the middle class become, let's say, the South and the West. So I think here there are multiple dimensions, and it's extremely difficult for a policymaker to keep all these balls in the air. I mean, just think of it, you know, you go there as a politician, and I'm now looking forward. I don't think anyone here is interested in the past, but it's relevant for the future. I mean, we're saying we need 8% growth for Viksit Bharat. I think that's good, and I think the number is also roughly right. Many people say you need more. But you know, when a politician goes out and says we need 8% growth, the image that is conjured in the minds of the audience is, wow, that's pretty good. That means I will get 8% growth in whatever I'm doing. That's wrong. In order to get 8% growth, you will have to bring about a structural transformation of the economy. Some sectors will get phased out. Some businesses will get phased out. Some states will have to change what they do in order to benefit from what is now possible. And quite frankly, this is not well understood. If I go back to my own, it's not my home state because I've never lived in there, but let's say Punjab. Now, you know, Punjab's self-image is very much taking great pride in having helped the country at a critical moment, getting food self-sufficiency. But the problem is today, from Punjab's point of view, growing as much rice as it does is not contributing to the country's food security, because enough people can grow rice. It's only destroying the water environment in Punjab itself, but it's not able to change. Looking a little further south, when I was deputy chairman of the Planning Commission a million years ago, I'd gone to Kerala, next door, made a speech. And I found that in Kerala, people were very concerned that Kerala must be self-sufficient in rice. So I said, why on earth should you be self-sufficient in rice? You have a bonanza of young Kerala skilled guys going to the Middle East, earning lots of money. They're not really interested in becoming rice farmers. So you must allow rice production to get phased out and go into high-value crops like spices and cardamom and things like that. But somebody rushed up to me and said, sir, this is a very sensitive matter, don't pursue this. I said, look, if a rich and well-educated state like Kerala cannot be persuaded that it's not important to be self-sufficient in rice because Bihar can produce all the rice you need, I mean, we're doing the wrong things. Then I was told, no, but in Kerala, we are specially interested in red rice, and they don't grow that here. I said, fine. Then you just pay more for red rice, much more for red rice than for other rice, and people will do it economically. So that's just one example, and it's very far from what is today being talked about, AI, high-tech, etc. Important point is this. I believe India can grow at 8% if it does a whole lot of reforms. But to be honest, we are now beyond the early stages of reforms. We're at a stage where, say, a 20-year growth rate at 8% will fundamentally transform the economy. Your real challenge is going to be, are you willing to see that transformation? And since that growth is going to be private sector led, it's going to happen mainly initially in the south. And then you will have these regional issues that if the country is to grow at 8%, but the south grows at 9% and the north grows at 7%, politics must be able to handle that. Of course, you have to persuade the north that, look, since the south is not growing as fast in terms of population, which is a good thing, basically what's going to happen is a lot of migration. Lower-end jobs will be filled, which they already are, by people coming in from Bihar and Orissa and so on. I mean, that is a huge structural change which will have all kinds of other consequences. And I don't think we are discussing that at all. We are just saying, Viksit Bharat, 8% reforms, which is true. But you know, the nature of those reforms, what exactly those reforms are, I think we're not paying enough attention to. Now, to be fair, there is some focus. I mean, I saw this morning in the newspapers that Karnataka has put out a new industrial policy which is going to clean up the procedures. I don't know the details, and I've asked to see it. But this is very different from what we were thinking of then. Every state must be doing the same thing. And we have to see how much actual cleaning up happens. Because, you know, it's very easy to have convert 40 applications into a single window. So instead of going to 40 different windows, maintaining 40 different files, having 40 different reference numbers, you just go to one window, one ID, one application. That's a major gain. But you know, if all that is going to happen is that that window is then going to send the application to 40 different windows that will process each of those applications. You have to make sure that the system is such that that level of processing is markedly improved. And we'll have to see how it works. You need to get feedback from people as to how it's working. Because anything you start, there'll always be some problems. You know, personally, I can see in my own life that this certainly ease of traveling has been hugely improved by DigiYatra. I mean, you just go there, you load the boarding pass on this cell phone, and it'll recognize your face, and you walk through, you don't have these long lines and so on. I think this is the result of bringing in technology, the telecom revolution which took place after 1994, Aadhaar, which Nandan Nilekani masterminded, which began in the UPA government and has been continued in the present government, which is a good thing, and other things that are being built on it, like UPI and what have you. It's a long process. So we need to envisage what are the substantive contents from now, let's say 2047, what reform. Now, I think there are some challenges, and I won't take 2 minutes on that, then I'll shut up. Earlier in 91, it was easy because the world was all speaking one language. I mean, we started the reform a couple of years after Eastern Europe had abolished communism, and there was only one thing to do, which is an integrated global market. And I mean, unless you were a complete out of place kind of person, that was the only world that existed. You either joined it or you didn't join it. That has become much more complex now, because the very fellows who kind of led the integrated open market are now busy fragmenting it. Geopolitical tensions have risen. The United States has its own problems, not only with its closest allies, like Canada and Mexico, but also with China. China is cozying up with Russia. Russia is becoming more dependent on China. And the Europeans are very scared of Russia. They're not that bothered about China. And India is faced with a world which is all of a sudden fragmented. Now, we didn't have that problem in 1991 at all. I mean, there was just one question. You want to join the world? This is what you do. You don't want to join the world? Then wallow in your own backyard. And it was clear that we want to join the world. That remains the case. I mean, today, I think the government's saying the right things, that, you know, we must join the global value chains, this, that, and the other. And there's some successes there. I mean, I think the Apple investment, targeting quite a substantial expansion of Apple, Foxconn producing Apple iPhones in India, is a good start, and it could actually expand very, very substantially. But, you know, the point arises that a lot of the components of this stuff are really coming still from China or China-based production. So you have to remain open to that. On the other hand, there is this view, which again the United States is pushing, that you want to isolate China. What should India be doing is a big question. And I think, I mean, take AI, which is what you're all talking about. I mean, there is a global concern that you must, quote, regulate, unquote, AI. Only the United States takes the view that you shouldn't regulate it at all, more or less. The Chinese take the view that we don't want anyone else's AI, no Google, no Facebook, no Instagram, no email. We got our own system. It's quite clearly, India cannot be doing that. So we have a choice between the Europeans, the Americans, and the Europeans. We have to be clear, we are not large enough to set up our own Indian standard. We can join the debate and thus have our view heard by one or the other. But there is a difference between the Americans and the Europeans. We are tending a little more to the Europeans. Because then, the Americans tend to be too extremely free market. The Europeans tend to take a more balanced view, so it's not a surprise. But on the other hand, what the Americans are saying is that this is why the Europeans are falling behind. That they're regulating AI in a manner that is killing innovation. Now, the Americans love projecting themselves as the only solution. We have to be careful. But it's a consideration that we should carefully weigh. And if we think that broadly we do need more regulation, I think we do. But the Europeans are overdoing it, then we should have a more precise exchange with them. What is it that we will do? What is the carve-out that we want if we don't fully want to accept? I think these are beyond my ken. I don't even, quite honestly, my grandson knows more about my iPhone 16 than I do. But we do need to get a very active debate going in the country on how we should move forward in this area. So I think these are some of the issues which make things complicated. There are other traditional, we need better infrastructure, better processes, better logistics. All of that is uncontroversial. The only two areas which I think are complicated are, one is labor regulations. I'll mention it and then stop. If somebody wants to discuss, we can. And the other, quite frankly, is land. Lots and lots of people say that if you want to encourage innovation, that's going to mean more smaller companies, younger people being encouraged to get a start. And that's where innovation happens. The big innovative things that we've seen didn't come out of huge companies. It came out of little fellows sort of making an important step forward. And the present regulations of land make it impossible for any young, small business to get ahead. And lots of people have told me that whichever state decides that this is the biggest problem and comes up with a credible way of, cutting the procedures in half, is bound to attract investment from all over India and, of course, also from abroad.
Actually, Dr. Ahluwalia, you actually touched on a lot of different themes that I did want you to talk about. We are going to get to the South, particularly Karnataka, in a bit. I want to talk about regional development in Karnataka. We can talk about that too. But before we do, you mentioned this idea that when we were starting out with the 1991 reforms, everybody was trying to do the same thing. It was easier. And things are very different right now, and we need to talk a little bit about that. But interestingly, when you helmed the Planning Commission in the high growth years of 2004 to 2011, roughly, there was a lot of money flowing around. I think protectionist sentiments were lower. And then things have changed after the global financial crisis. And now we're in a very different world. And to complicate matters, we also have serious imbalances in trade and investment, particularly with China. China's trade surplus with India today is more than India's trade surplus with America, European Union, and the United Kingdom combined, by far. What would you advise policymakers at this stage, given what we are seeing, that there's rising protectionist sentiment around the world? China runs a massive trade surplus with us. We are rivals, even if not enemies, maybe we're enemies too. What would you suggest as an economist, as a policymaker, to the government at the center and the states? What should we be doing?
Well, there are many questions nicely wrapped by you into that what looks like one question. Let's separate the issue of trade surpluses and deficits from the issue of China. I mean, one approach could be that, look, India is running too high a trade deficit, and that is a serious destabilizing factor in our economy. I think that should be taken seriously, but please remember that that trade deficit is the deficit in goods. That takes no credit whatsoever from the fact that we're quite the reverse on services. So the trade deficit India is running in goods and services is not nearly as bad as the deficit it's running on the goods side alone. Now let's be clear about it. Unless we are anti-services, if we want to reduce the trade deficit in manufacturers and maintain the trade levels of services, you're really asking us to run a trade surplus. And I don't think for a developing country that makes a lot of sense. So I think the fear that our balance of payments can't be managed is not correct. Now come to a separate point, and that is there an excessive vulnerability because you depend on one country? I think that's also a relevant issue. But yes, if you feel that we should reduce our dependence on China and shift to other import sources, that's diversification. But that's not the same thing as saying, don't import from China, produce it yourself. So the logic of diversification is different from the logic of the level of imports. Let me give some examples. Take, for example, photovoltaic cells, okay? We, rightly in my view, have adopted a very ambitious program of moving away from coal-fired power generation to renewable energy. Now, the global consensus on this is getting frayed right now, thanks to President Trump, but let's assume somehow or the other that the world is going to come back to the idea that, look, we don't want the planet to burn, and most countries, I don't know how we'll get back, but most countries in a couple of years will have got back to saying that, look, renewable energy is the way to go. Now, if we are going down that route, we just don't have a domestic solar photovoltaic cell production capacity which is consistent with our ambition in setting up the total capacity. And clearly, to the extent to which we can produce this stuff, we should have a program for producing it. But it's going to take some time to do that. Currently, what the Chinese have done is they have invested their own money to produce capacity for photovoltaic cells, which is about 100% more than the current world demand, as a result of which the prices of these cells have just collapsed. Now, what does that mean? Every other country that is going in for renewable energy is happily buying Chinese cells at very low cost and therefore producing relatively cheap renewable energy. If the cells are available at that low cost, does it make sense for us also to benefit from that or no? I think there's a big difference between a long-term objective of building up one's own capacity and a short-term aversion of buying from China. I think this global excess supply of cells will probably phase out after about 3 or 4 years if every country moves to renewable energy. But in that 3 or 4 years is there. So you have a real question. Are you not going to benefit from these available low prices of Chinese cells, or are you going to benefit from that? Now, that's a very different decision from buying intelligent sort of chips which control machinery and all the rest of it. You could argue that certain kinds of high advanced chips, which are used in, let's say, in what controls our financial system, our electricity grid, traffic control, etc. These chips you don't want to be such that could be hacked from outside, so that somebody could actually take control of the system without your knowing it. That's a real security threat. So you identify those things and you say, look, that must come from what you call a reliable supplier. We don't have the capacity at the moment to produce these chips ourselves. Presumably there are other reliable suppliers. We should get it from them. If we feel that we can't trust China, there's no harm in sort of erecting a wall around Chinese supply from those sources. But take something like, active pharmaceutical ingredients. There, I mean, we have and had a great sort of comparative advantage in formulation of, in production of all kinds of pharmaceutical formulations, but somehow in the active pharmaceutical ingredients, we kind of vacated the space. And we have now become absurdly dependent on China. Now, given that we believe we want to be the pharmacy of the world, and we have that capacity, and our pharmaceutical producers are competing, there's no doubt in my mind that we should do a much better job of having active pharmaceutical ingredients produced in India. And I think there is some PLI for I don't know how it's going, but you need to concentrate and focus that that's an area where the demand exists domestically because we are servicing global supply, and we should have a much higher internal dependence. So, what decision we take and where has to be finely tuned. The general idea that somehow our balance of payments suggests that we must not import from China, this I don't think is correct. And actually, if your balance of payments deficit overall is a problem, then quite frankly, macroeconomics suggests that you should just reduce the level of absorption domestically, because the overall balance of payments just reflects the excess of demand over available domestic supply. So you increase supply where you can, and reduce the demand. And reducing the demand means accept the fact that you're not going to have a very rapid growth, because that will choke your growth rate also. So, I mean, these are all interconnected. And I think that too much is, I find very often people say, this is what we must do. Number one, 8% growth. Number two, cut down our balance of payments deficit. Number three, don't import anything from China. I mean, quite frankly, that doesn't add up.
Now you understand why policymaking can be so complex. I'm soon going to come to the audience, and if you have some questions, we'll give you an opportunity. But I want to get us to Karnataka, to the south. Because ultimately, whatever India does, a lot of it happens in the states. And here we are in this state and in this city. And the topic today is about resilient and inclusive growth and green growth. So we'll talk a little bit about that. If you land in Bangalore, if you land at the airport, it's a very modern airport, world-class airport, and you feel that you've come to, if nothing else, an upper middle income country, and that seems, to a foreign visitor, that could possibly be, oh, this is great. Karnataka has the fourth highest per capita income in the country. However, Karnataka's social indicators lag its income status. Whether it's literacy, whether it is, infant mortality, maternal mortality. And there's a lot of regional imbalance in this state. Now, here we have the private sector, some of the, greatest kind of examples of tech and innovation are here. They will need more markets. They cannot all rely only on cities like Bangalore. For that, regional development has to be stronger, has to be better. How can the public and the private sectors work together to make sure that there's more equitable development in the state, so that the private sector also has a much bigger market to work with in the future?
Well, I mean, let me say that, first let's give credit to Karnataka for having done a very good job. One of the things I mentioned in my book is that Bangalore is the only city in India that was elevated to a verb, in the sense that people who lost their jobs in the US said, I've been Bangalored. So, clearly Bangalore was a leader in an important sense. So creating this very vibrant hub, and it's the result of a very long period. It's not the result of any one decision. I mean, the fact that Jamshedji Tata decided to set up the Indian Institute of Science here, that there were a couple of earlier public sector scientific-based institutions, that you have a good higher educational system, and lots of people came in. Possibly the climate is a lot better than in many other parts of the country. So, you got this thing. I think you do need to worry that making a city livable is not just the result of getting a lot of companies investing in it. There's a whole lot of urban management that has to be done. And I think Bangalore has not done what it should be doing. Now that it is on the global map, if you like, of possible areas that could attract investment, the first thing that should be done is that Bangalore's city government should be made hugely more efficient. Now, unfortunately, in our country, city governments don't have much power. And that's true of all states. That's certainly true, for example, of Maharashtra, and it's the same thing holds for Bombay. So you need huge improvements in Bangalore itself in managing various aspects. Second, you said that there ought to be a spilling over into other cities. I think that's true. One of the things that the IT sort of revolution allows is the decentralization of production groups. You don't all have to be in the same place. I don't know how you do that. Because I think very few states have consciously tried to set up new, if you like, urban centers. Now, if you look at the trend of urbanization, this is a consequence of my earlier point that structural change. If India is going to grow at 8%, then the urban population is going to grow very rapidly. Gandhiji said India lives in its villages, and many people still regard that as a sort of romantic vision. I think you have to recognize that India will not be Viksit if it doesn't largely reduce the numbers staying in villages. So, this should be, I think good Gandhians should recognize that this is not an undermining of the views of the Mahatma expressed these views 100 years ago. So, the idea that, I don't think he said India lives in its villages and will continue to do so 100 years later. Now, if you think of the shift, how is this shift going to happen? We just will need to pick up tier 2 towns and make them into near metro. Now, the only known cases in India where this happens is when a new state is carved out and a capital has to be created. That's what's happening in Andhra Pradesh now, where Telangana can't use Hyderabad, and so the chief minister is setting up a new capital. I'm not suggesting what you should do in Karnataka, but it's my general view. We should seriously consider cutting down many of the larger states into 2 or 3. Look, UP, I think the chief minister of UP in the early 2000s, Madam Benji, as she was called then, she had said we should, Mayawati should break up, we should have 3 states. Harit Pradesh and then UP and Purvanchal or something like that. Western, Central, Eastern UP. Now, you know, if you did that, instantly there would be a political willingness to create 3 new good cities. People have said that this could be done in many other states. In Maharashtra, for example, there are people who have said that the Vidarbha area should be made a separate state with Nagpur as its capital. So I'm consciously not making any comment on Karnataka, but I wonder what residents of Karnataka would think, whether there's scope for doing something similar. The main reason I think we'll need to think about it is that the resistance to building a new city and the land acquisition that is involved sharply goes down if whoever's doing it says it's the capital of a new state. So it's quite a tempting thing to think of. Short of that, I mean, it has to be a conscious decision by the state government to divert resources into building up 1 or 2 cities. Now, the problem is that if you want to build a first-class city, within the state of Karnataka, for example, the amount of diversion of Karnataka's resources to one city would become very large. So either the central government decides that each state, you create a new Tier 2 city development fund and you give money from the central government for all these kinds of things, or the state has to do it itself. Whether it will do it depends. I mean, we'll have to see.
Just a quick follow-up. It's a political economy issue. Do you think that when there are big states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar out there, where the kind of demographic kind of differences between the South and these bigger states, until and unless there is some reorganization in those states, is it feasible to politically sell the idea of reorganization of southern states?
Well, it's the only interesting reforms are the ones that are not politically easy. So this is where don't go back to 1991 for inspiration, because those were no-brainer reforms, really. This is when we're getting really tough decisions. But look, I don't know what the latest population estimate of UP is, about 190, 200 million, something like that. And all our states are highly centralized. So it's impossible to think that the chief minister of what, if it was a separate country, would be the 5th largest or something in the world, is going to be responsible for looking at every little thing. It just can't happen. And the evidence we have of the new states that have been created, their performance has improved. I mean, some studies have been done of these new states, and they certainly have. For the simple reason that, you know, the problems of different areas are more easy to look at if it's a manageable situation.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to the audience, but one thing I would like you to reflect on is there something in your own career, especially when you worked for the central government, that you had a policy, some idea that you wish you had done something differently?
Oh goodness, I mean, that's, of course, but to do that one would have to go back into time and think again. Look, I don't think, one thing you must be clear about, that when you do a reform, it's not like planning the trajectory of a rocket. I mean, ISRO, when it shoots up a rocket, and I've been there to witness one of these things, and there's a nice trajectory drawn out, and a little dot that shows how the rocket is going, and they're watching every, the slightest deviation from that trajectory, something is a problem. That's not what you do with economic reforms. You have a broad idea, this is the way to go, can't do everything, let's do what comes first. I think it's very important to realize that in retrospect, it's always arguable that you should have done something first. But the practical the practical idea that you will get reforms that balance everything is actually wrong. The reforms that work are the ones that create imbalance, and then the system responds to that imbalance. In a way, you might say that a well-designed reform is one which creates the optimum imbalance. You know, in the old days of development economics, there was a debate between the fellows who believed in balanced growth versus unbalanced growth. And a lot of the economists said that, you know, if growth is going to take place, then you're going to need this much of A and this much of B and this much of C, and you should plan that out in advance. Whereas the unbalanced growth said, look, the market will take care of this, just get the essential things done, and as scarcities arise, resources will move to fill those gaps. I think that's correct. And in reforms also, make a list of 30 reforms, and that's every economist has his favorite list of 30 reforms. If I were advising a chief minister, I would really ask, which of these is going to trigger the maximum tendency within the society to react in the right way, not make sure that you do everything in parallel. I mean, look, the obvious thing for us was, and we knew that look, we don't have a very good educational system. Everybody who studied it says it's bad. The trouble is, it takes 20 years to put right the educational system. It takes exactly 5 minutes to get rid of a foolish trade policy and liberalize trade. So should we not have done that and waited till the educational system improved? Or should we do that and let the scarcities be created? That'll make people realize that these are the real problems and we must handle them. And I think we did the right thing. I would say that we did some things far too slowly. I mean, for example, we got rid of industrial licensing for the big fellows. They liked that. The small-scale fellows did not want small-scale reservation to be removed. Technically, it was very clear that the small-scale reservation was preventing the growth of Indian industry, which had all the entrepreneurial dynamism. The small scale was not being allowed to get to middle scale because the small scale reservation prevented that. And unless they got to middle scale, they would not be able to penetrate export markets. I mean, in the sense that if somebody wanted to place an order for t-shirts, they would want 500,000 t-shirts. And we had a whole bunch of fellows who could say, we can provide you 2,000. But not 500,000. Now, that was known to the system, but the politics made it impossible to persuade small-scale industry that, look, give up this reservation. Now, we did give it up, but the last small-scale reservation went in 2004 or something like that, having started in 1991. I feel that we should have done what we did in half the time. I'm not a great believer in what you might call the Big Bang reform. So it's not that you do it in 2 years or 3 years. But what we did in 20 years should have been done in 10. Now, if you ask me, would it have been politically possible to do so? I don't know. Because within the first 2 years, the crisis was over. During the crisis period, you were able to do whatever you want because people said, look, the scarcities are unmanageable. Once the scarcities became unmanageable, it became difficult to resist political pressure.
True. I have so many more questions, but I would like to turn to the audience. And okay, there are lots and lots of hands. Let's first start with this side, and then we can come to you. A mic for the gentleman right here.
There must be a law of physics that says that this side is more densely populated than this one.
Yeah.
Is there any reason for that?
I don't know.
Why do you move here?
This has been like that for some time. So, gentleman right here, and then the gentleman here. Or you can ask first, and then you can ask the second question.
Okay, thank you everyone. Dr. Ahluwalia, I completely agree to your point that we should create more larger cities and also empower, give autonomy to the current largest cities in India. Also considering the fact that farmers are going to get more empowered, so there will be less labor required. That will also make movement more to the city side. What would be the potential solution that you suggest to the current government, maybe like making a mayor more empowered, to manage the city or more autonomy. So I was looking forward to your thoughts.
Because of the resounding effect that fully getting.
Just quickly remind him of the question.
So what would be the potential ideas to empower the cities?
Empower the
Cities, maybe bringing more autonomy, a concept like a mayor, the way we have in London.
Well, constitutionally, any state government can empower the lower level authority as much as it wants. The central government cannot do that. So the issue of the distribution of power within a state is not something that the central government can do. But if you found a chief minister who said, look, I am convinced that we must decentralize power to, let us say, the top 3 cities, he must first say that. I can assure you I won't recommend any particular consulting group or research institution. But if you found a chief minister whom you could sell this idea, I'm personally willing to come and work with whoever it is to tell you what to do. The constraint isn't how to do it. Constraint is, does anyone want to do it? Because remember, if you empower the city, the mayor of the city would become a politically important position. Nothing wrong with that, you just appoint your own guy. Look, I'll tell you a nice story from my book Backstage. When I went with Mr. Rajiv Gandhi's 1998 visit or whatever to China, we were flying in the plane and we looked at the agenda and it said there was a stop in Shanghai. And I looked at the agenda and it said dinner with the mayor of Shanghai. Now, in India, nobody knows the name of the mayor of the city except his family. So I said, what on earth is this? Why is the prime minister? They said, no, sir, I forget the name of the Chinese. He later on, he said, he's going to be the next prime minister. So the point is that you can empower your city mayors if the political class wants to. And it could always be arranged that he would belong to your party, he would be the next most important person, etc. But if you don't want to do it, then there's no point in talking about all the details.
Thank you. The young man here, and then I'm looking for some women. Why are the women quiet? So some women will please raise their hands. In the meantime, the gentleman here.
Am I audible?
I can't see, actually. Can you come out here? Easier. Because I can't see, I'm lip reading to understand your question.
Hello, sir. Thanks for the talk. I'm Tejas. I work with the finance department of Karnataka. So, as we actually talk about economic growth and global challenges, so I wanted to know your thoughts on the public debt that is actually haunting a lot of subnational governments. So, if we are talking about India's growth, I think it is actually important to acknowledge that the states that you mentioned in the talk, that Kerala, Punjab, and all those states are actually entering into debt traps. And how do you actually deal with that when we look at the country's growth?
No, I think you're absolutely right that the states have all become fiscally very weak because the scale of debt relative to both the revenue they generate and their gross state domestic product is too high. I think the Niti Aayog has brought out some document which ranks states. It's a very interesting ranking, by the way, because the worst, euphemisms have come in big time. I mean, the worst states are called aspirational. The next ones are called achievers. Then the fellows are called outstanding. Karnataka is not in the worst state list. It's somewhere in the middle. But the truth of the matter is that as long as you have a financial system that respects a certain amount of discipline, the states cannot borrow except what the central government authorizes them to borrow. And assuming that the central government will continue, since finance minister has said we want to lower the central debt to GDP ratio over time, I'm assuming that they will do the same thing for the states. So the states will not be able to borrow more than a certain amount. Now, if the revenue that the states are generating does not sustain the expenditures they want, it can, and you can't borrow, then it can only mean that either you're forced to raise resources or you cut other expenditures. And I think there will be a crunch of that kind. By the way, the states, I mean, this is something you also have to think about, that, there's a tendency for states, all states, to say that they can't raise resources. This is not actually true. I mean, let me give you one example since you talked about cities. There's a huge demand in urban India, middle class, upper middle class India, for better service. All of them have relatives abroad. All of them, when their relatives come, their grandchildren say, what is this lousy, filthy environment, etc., and they get very upset. They don't realize that their children abroad are paying property taxes which are financing the municipal services. So, I mean, since almost all of you have relatives abroad, I mean, after all, this is Bangalore, I ask you to just do a simple calculation. Ask your relatives, what is their property tax as a percentage of the value of the property, okay, abroad? And just consider what is the property tax you are paying as a percentage of the value of your property. You will be surprised that in order to equate your tax with your relatives abroad, your property tax probably would have to increase 20-fold. 20-fold. So actually what is happening is we're creating a prosperous class and we're making the mistake of thinking that because they have income so that they can buy goods and travel and go to the Taj West End every now and then and so on, that's all that's necessary. But actually, to live in a lifestyle that they've got used to, they should pay much more property taxes, which would go to the local authority. So, that's one resource which, to my mind, by the way, what a lot of people have, there's been some rationalization of this, but nothing comparable to what the rate rationalization is. And frankly, this is good. I mean, if any of you ever become chief minister, you will find this very difficult. But that's one of the issues. Should the rates be fixed by the state? Because in India, the local property tax rates are fixed by the state. I would recommend that let them be fixed by the city. Cities that want to look decent will just charge higher rates. And believe me, it's only the top 20% in the city that will actually be paying the property tax. So the incentive to do it will be greater. That's what we should do.
There's a young lady in the middle. Yeah, yes, you with the glasses, please. Yes. Please give her a mic.
Can you come forward?
Can you come here? Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, you mentioned that we need to have good or well-built cities, and we can divide the larger states into 2 or 3 more states. My question is, while we are discussing about India's growth amidst the global challenges, we have seen that in the 29 states present in India, there are a lot of interstate conflicts that's going on. So when we are thinking about India on a global level, is it wise to increase the number of states, which will definitely in turn increase the number of interstate conflicts, and in the process of creating more states and a better city, will we fall back in facing the global challenges while solving the local challenges?
I mean, it's a very difficult question. The interstate conflicts that you talk about are mainly on water.
Yes.
So you're really talking about the distribution of water. Even in other countries, there have been such conflicts, but they've found ways of addressing this with greater reliance on market forces, by the way, which we hate doing. I think it's a very complex matter, and in our arrangement, if both states agree, we worked on this in the Planning Commission to see whether there was some way. The present situation is that if all the inter-riverine states actually agree, then the center can pass a law on how the water should be distributed. Otherwise, it's a consensual thing. And of course, consensual means there's some award, and then some state says the lower riparian state just rejects the award, and then you have to go to the Supreme Court. And that doesn't work. So frankly, you're right. Don't think of a conflict. There's no conflict on most other things, okay? And with GST, the issue of uniformity of taxation has been sorted out. Water is a huge problem. You know, it's not just a problem between states. It's a problem within states. Go back to Punjab, because states are matters are sensitive, so I prefer to give examples of a state that I originally came from, but you can find the same example elsewhere. You know, use of water to produce rice, which is then sent to the rest of the country, is actually an export of water from one of the most water-scarce states in the country to one of the most, among the more water-profitable, well-endowed state. Doesn't make sense, okay? But what is happening as a result is that more and more water is being pumped out from underground. In order to pump it out from underground, you need more and more powerful pumps. Richer farmers can afford powerful pumps. So by lowering the water table, they're actually impoverishing all the guys who can't afford the pumps. Now, the situation is made worse by the fact that power is free. But although power is free, you have to pay for the pump. If power was not free, then they would be much more incentivized to utilize the water efficiently. This is a general problem which you should all think about. Can we deal with what is undoubtedly going to be an increasingly water-stressed situation without bringing in the pricing of water to allocate across different sectors? The current policy of all states and the center, I guess, is yes. The center can say it's not its problem, it's the state's problem. No state that I'm aware of is willing to say that because water has become scarce, we must introduce pricing. Now, if you don't believe in market allocation, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine in my view, but I accept that. But then you must say that you're going to allocate water centrally, which means you'll regulate every single pump, which is not feasible. So quite frankly, on the water side, we have an unworkable policy framework. And somebody should, I meet hundreds of NGOs who worry about this. None of them is in favor of pricing. So I ask them, how are you going to solve this problem?
Thank you. I'm told by the organizers that our time is up. It's flashing red, so I'm really sorry. I know you have a lot of questions, but we can't take any more. I thank Dr. Ahluwalia for an illuminating discussion. I thank the people of Karnataka and Bangalore and the leadership of this state, and a special thanks to MB Patilji, Minister Patilji, and Gunjan Krishnaji, the leader of this summit, and the team that has been organizing this. Has been a fantastic, fantastic time. Thank you so much for being a great audience.
What an interesting session it was. So thank you so much for gracing this occasion and being present amongst us. And thank you so much for moderating it so well. Would like to acknowledge your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you put your hands together while we have the honors given out to them. Thank you so much for gracing this occasion, and thank you so much for hosting this so well. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Give a big round of applause to these two stalwarts.